welcome to my channel where we discuss anything and everything to do with mental health and psychology. In this video we're just going to be going through the doctorate process and how I went about selecting my universities. So I found this to be one of the hardest parts about starting the process because there's so many universities with so many different requirements offering. Even though they all offer the doctorate in clinical psychology, they all offer it in a very different way. So it's quite difficult to find a university that really matches you and who you are and who you aspire to be as a clinical psychologist. And I also think that this is the point that determines almost your chances or your probability of actually getting onto a course. For example, if you don't meet the requirements, it's unlikely that you get accepted onto that course, because a lot of them filter the process by almost excluding people who don't meet their minimum requirements. Whereas actually you can maximise your chances of getting in if you select universities where you meet the minimum requirements and with selection processes that suit you and your qualities and your skills. So the first step of how I went about doing this was to take the map of the UK from the Alternative Handbook. And this really works well rather than just a normal map because it actually highlights all the universities offering the doctorate in clinical psychology. So I drew a region around where I'm willing to go and willing to move to or travel to. So once I had circled the area that I was willing to move to or willing to travel to, I started looking at what was important to me in a university. And here's really important because as much as you want the universities to select you, it's really important that you select universities that almost embody how you want to be as a clinical psychologist. Because when you get into training, the course you go to really shapes your experience as a clinical psychologist. One method of comparing each university that I found quite useful was to make an Excel spreadsheet. So with the universities on one side, with the requirements, so the grade requirements, if they need a BSc and that's fine, or whether they require a master's, research experience, academic experience, clinical experience. So I really divided it into what they want and to better assess whether I have those things. Because if I didn't meet their minimum requirements, then I just crossed them off my list and I didn't apply to those ones. However, after I had gone through the process of selecting my universities, had selected them, I found one that Jason, I can't remember his last name, but I'll put his social medias in the description box below and I'll put a link to his Excel spreadsheet, and I believe he's the one that created it. And I think it's a really useful resource. It is from last year and I'm not really sure if he's going to update it for this year, but I think it sets the framework and it gives you a good guideline of what universities require, what they don't require. But I do think just check the clearinghouse website and then check the universities that you want to apply for, check their actual websites, because there might be slight differences in the process or what they require. So then, step number 3, for the universities that have gone through my shortlisting process, what I would do is write the number of places at each university. And I know that some places do end up with more spaces. They do get extra funding to be able to offer more spaces to more trainees. However, you won't know that at this stage and you won't know that until later in the process. So I wouldn't consider that at this stage because you should just go with the information that you have, not on the hopes that they might increase in spaces. So then step number 4, once I know the minimum requirements and I meet those minimum requirements and I know the number of spaces available for the last cohort, then I'm at a position where I can start thinking about, okay, what are their selection processes and do these selection processes suit my skill set and my qualities and what I excel at. So if you don't like research methods, I would not select tests with research methods. If you're quite good at ethical questions or ethical scenario questions, then maybe selecting one with situational judgment tests. If you're not good at tests at all, there are universities that offer spaces and don't require you to sit multiple selection tests. If you are selecting the latter, then I would suggest, if in your pool you can't find those universities, actually consider increasing the region that you're willing to move to. And I know this is uncomfortable because a lot of people aren't in the place or aren't in a financial situation to move. If you feel comfortable taking the risk and you feel passionately about the region that you've selected, that's fine, stick to that and think about selection tests that you're willing to do or you're willing to prepare for. Because I wouldn't do, if you're really bad at, because I don't like tests, as was evident if you've watched my like vlog thing about my selection process, like my whole Dclin process, I do not like tests. I did a situational judgment test that I had no experience of. I went through some medical ones, but I just didn't have any experience. So do tests that you have experience in and you are confident in, okay, this increases my chances of getting in. Because I think a lot of it is probability and chance. People say a lot of it is luck, but I think a lot of it is probability and chance. So I think it's all about maximising the probability of you getting in. Because there's no point if you know you don't meet the minimum requirements to apply to that university, because most likely with that amount of applicants, because some universities had 1,000 plus applicants, if a lot of them are meeting those requirements, you almost get filtered to the back. But you want to select universities that you meet the minimum requirements and you will do well in their selection process. And I know you might not feel confident in interviews or in tests, but it's that, okay, what are the resources available and how can I maximise my chances of getting in? And obviously if you want to take the risk and do something that you're not as confident in because you really want to get into that university, then I think you should do that. Even if you struggle with research methods or selection tests in general, or even interviews, if it's something that you know realistically is a weakness or is something that you struggle with, you will just, I would say, take the risk, but then also know that you have to prepare for those things, because you have to really work hard on building the skills that you don't have. Because I feel like interview skills, research methods is something that you can work towards, if that makes sense, and you can build that skill of being good at it, if that makes sense. And if you want me to make content on like how to prepare for interviews, things like that, then I'm more than happy to do that. But obviously this is just about selecting the university. So I just really wanted to separate each section just so this video is not extremely long and it just has the content that you're looking for. So the next step number 5, is the course content. So looking at the course content and seeing if it's something that resonates with you. And here I think it's important to know, okay, the theoretical orientation. So most courses are CBT focused, and that is something that generically every course teaches, but then they always have a second or third modality that they also specialise in. So for example, thinking about my personal interests, I'm interested in CBT. I think CBT is the best thing ever. Obviously limitations, all of that kind of stuff. But I do also like systemic, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to do clinical psychology. And so I chose universities where the secondary was systemic or had another secondary one that I was really interested in. But as well as a theoretical modality, you also want to think about what other wider contextual issues of clinical psychology do they focus on. So do they focus on developmental psychology, lifespan, social psychology, political psychology? There's so many different aspects. Social constructionist views. Do they have a critical, more of a critical perspective on things or organisations or how systems are? So those kinds of things are really going to be important. And secondly, also looking at placements, because if there's placements that don't really interest you, don't really almost like meet where you want to be as a clinical psychologist, it's really going to put a barrier in the way of you becoming that clinical psychologist that you want to be. So if there's a lot of forensic placements or like placements in areas that you do not want to expand in, or the university focuses on areas of clinical psychology that you don't see yourself ever going into, I think it really presents a barrier, because then you're almost like training and gaining skills in something that after you've qualified won't really apply, if that makes sense. Because then when you go off as a clinical psychologist and you want to work in a field that you've never done a placement in, it might be a little bit harder to get in a job in that area, if that makes sense. So it's like, obviously we all want to get into a course, we all want to get into training, but actually looking at the quality of that training and does that match what I aspire to be. I think there's also wider contextual things that are more broadly within psychology. So thinking about, do they focus on lived experience? Do they focus on participation, like service user participation? Do they focus on staff well-being? Like for me, like therapist well-being, psychologist well-being, I'm deeply passionate about it, and obviously wrote a whole thesis on it and a publication on it. So that was something that was central to who I envisioned myself to be as a clinical psychologist, if that makes sense. So I didn't want to do a course where lived experience wasn't acknowledged or well-being wasn't prioritized, if that makes sense. Because as well as needing to prioritize the well-being of the people that you're serving, which is obviously of utmost importance, you also need to think about yourself and your own well-being, which is central to how I envision myself as a clinical psychologist, or as someone who, I've never managed a service before, but if I was to manage an organisation, a team, that would be almost like the central part of how I would, my leadership basically. So that would be really important as my value in a course. So I really wanted one that focused on well-being, lived experience and diversity. As very clearly a brown person, I didn't want to go into a course where diversity wasn't as acknowledged or wasn't as talked about, especially because I find, and obviously this is my personal experience, you guys might have your own personal experience, or some people might prefer a course where there's less diversity, but what I found is when you're in a course where it's not as diverse, you come across a lot of microaggressions, and I do think it comes from an unintentional place, because people haven't almost reflected on their unconscious biases, haven't had that openness with themselves, or even challenged themselves or approached diversity enough for those thoughts or beliefs to be challenged or brought up, if that makes sense. And I find if you're going to go on a course for 3 years, and as a someone from a diverse background or a background that isn't as represented in clinical psychology, like psychologically it can be quite a difficult place to be. And for me, I didn't want to go into a course for 3 years where diversity is not as acknowledged. And I think a lot of the times on courses it's talked about, but it's not, the degree of how important it is not as acknowledged, if that makes sense. Because it does shape how you would see yourself, and almost you will internalize some of those biases in terms of feeling like you don't belong, or a feeling like you shouldn't speak about certain things, but also looking at the research interests. So each course, each university is going to have a research component. That's not something that you can almost shy away from or ignore, but then also looking at the type of research projects that they do have. Within this, I would also look at staff research interests, or whether it resonates with you. I don't think this part is as important as the other aspects, but if you're like, let's say you've still got more than 4 universities that you've selected and you just want to whittle it down a little bit more, then maybe look at staff research interests. Do they specialise in something that really resonates with you? Or do they have extra things that you can participate in, or extra aspects? So for example, some universities are accredited in other things, so they might be BABCP accredited, they might be accredited by, I think it's ACT, the family therapy, or systemic therapy. Are they accredited for DBT? Are they accredited for other things? Because that will really make you stand out when you are a clinical psychologist. Make it you stand out from like almost like a sea of clinical psychologists, if that makes sense. And I think accreditation is also really useful because with accreditation, when you're accredited by a organisation, it not only makes you more employable, it also makes you more open to other trainings that are often for free. So I'm already accredited by the BABCP, and through that you can get magazines, you can get extra trainings, online trainings, you get discounts on official trainings, so you get a lot more in terms of your ongoing professional development, whereas you might not get that if you're not accredited, if that makes sense. Also, I think another one to bear in mind is support structures. So what support structures is the university offering? If you do have lived experience, if you have disabilities, if you have any other extra needs, how supportive is that university? What support structures do they already have in place, and do they advertise? You can see what they're offering, and I think that might actually help in your selection process, because especially with like physical disabilities, I know that that community of trainees do find it a struggle to find support within universities. So actually looking into those, what supports are available, what allowances are available, what adaptations can they put in place, and that might determine whether that university or that course meets your needs or not. Hopefully the tips in this video were useful for you in being able to select a university that best meets your needs. And if you were to take one thing away from this video, I would say that as important as it is for you to be selected onto a course and get a place onto training, which I know is really important for all of us that are aspiring clinical psychologists, I think it's also important to bear in mind that as much as universities are selecting you, you are also selecting the university. So think about what's important to you, what your values are, and how the university best meets those. And again, the resources mentioned in this video are linked down in the description. Yeah, so good luck on your doctorate journey, and if you would want me to make any more content on the process, about my tips, then just let me know. Don't forget to like, comment and share this video if you found it useful. And yeah, I shall see you guys in the next video.